Now what we're going to do, since our frame loom is set up, we're going to get our rigid heddle set in. So what this is these slots are called heddles. These are the pieces of wood that I told you to put aside for later. You can see there are slots. So one is deeper than the shallow one, then a deep one, then a shallow one. So we're going to put consecutively from left to right a piece of yarn into each slot. So from a deep one, then a shallow, then deep, then shallow. We're going to start, we have two of these. We're going to put one on the bottom and one on top. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the putting one on the bottom. So the piece of wood, you can see one is thicker than the other after the slots or the heddles. We're going to go ahead and put the thicker one on top and the thinner one on bottom. So I'll show you what to do. So to start this, you want to put your heddle underneath your warp. That's the threaded wool on the loom. And then you're going to go ahead and start on this left side here with this deep slot. So you want to take the piece of yarn that's furthest away and put that through that deeper slot. And then the next one goes into the narrow slot. So I'm just going to go through and put one into each slot consecutively. You want to make sure that your threads don't get crossed. So if it's on the left side to the right, you want to do the piece of thread or yarn that's just to the right of a slot. So I wouldn't take one here and cross it over because that's going to cause problems later. So you want to do the piece of yarn directly to the right of the one that you've done. And you can see as you start doing this, they all kind of lay into place. Like I mentioned before, the wool is a little bit sticky. Sometimes it sticks together. And sticky, I don't mean sticky like it has honey on it, but the wool will stick together because of the cuticles on the wool. So sometimes you have to pull two pieces apart to make sure that you have the one that's directly to the right of the last piece of yarn that you put in through the slot. So you can see the slots, starts going in, and I have this heddle angled backwards a little bit so that I can manage it better. So everything, because they're all through the pegs on the loom, on the front and the back, they're in order already, so it's fairly quick. But like right here, you can see the yarn was hiding underneath the next one, so you want to make sure to get that in order. And it gets a little bit trickier as we go along. You can always push your heddle to the left slightly if you're having a hard time getting things where they need to go. And this is another reason you really want to have tension on your yarn as you're threading your loom, because it keeps everything in order and they are less likely to slip under one another while you're working on your loom. All right, so I'm going to keep going all the way across. And you can see the fuzz that's coming off of the yarn grabs onto the piece of yarn next to it, and sometimes you have to pull it apart. And be real careful as you're putting these into the slots. The wood that was cut is very, very thin and it can break easily. Some of you may even have a heddle that has a piece missing. It won't be a problem because we're going to put two together and that'll make a complete barrier once you have the two together. So it gets a little bit crowded at the end, but you can keep going. And some of this yarn is already falling into other places. Okay, so now I'm at the end. You can see I have it into all the slots. There's just one slot on the end, just the way I threaded the loom. So I'm going to go ahead And I'm going to take one of these sticks that I have and just push all the yarn down as low as it goes. And you can see this, because the yarn is so thick, it kind of holds it into place, so I can let go and it's going to stay there. I'm going to want to hold on to it a little bit as I add this back in. So you want to have the ends of your rigid heddle. So you take the top part of it and you're going to have it on, line it up directly, and it will push straight down. So all of those pieces of yarn that you just threaded through the bottom part of the heddle are right there, and you just need to lift them up into the area where they're overlapped. So one thing that is helpful to do this, you can take your stick again and put it underneath all the yarn, and it will help push it up where it needs to go. You want to really make sure that you don't have any yarn doubled anywhere, and this is actually really smooth the way I've done that. Sometimes you get yarn doubling up and it's not quite as smooth, but it's helpful to have that stick underneath. So now I have both of the top and the bottom of the rigid heddle. You can see the end has these notches here that come out, and then you have this piece of wood that's cut to go on the end of it. When mine was laser cut, these notches are slightly larger than the hole in this, so it's not going to work. It will not stay on. So what I'm going to do for mine, because I can't even slide that thing on, I'm just going to take a piece of tape. You could take a piece of string or a piece of wire. I'm just going to tape these together. You just want to make sure that you can take your rigid heddle off when you want to. So you don't want to glue it together. But I'm just going to tape mine together. And I happen to have this really thin paper tape. But you may not even need to tape it. You could just hold them together because this yarn is fairly thick, so it's kind of holding it into place. But if it starts slipping, you're going to have to be mindful of holding them together as you're lifting up and down and weaving. So I have tape on either side. You can see when I push down on the loom, you can see that some of this thread is coming up. The yarn comes up, every other one comes up, and then there's a little space right here. You see how that's creating this space? It's called the shed. So this way, instead of going through, and this will go back and forth, instead of going through my weaving to weave plain weave, I want to lift up every other thread. I would have to go through like this with every other thread to lift it up. Instead of doing that with a rigid heddle, I push down and every other thread gets lifted up, and then when I pull it up, the opposite threads get lifted up. And so then I'll just put this stick through and make sure the ones that are supposed to be up are up to create a shed. So I'm going to show you how to start weaving now.